introduction. So welcome. We're doing a deep dive into getting ready for your first 360. And whether you've been certified for a long time or just a short time, it doesn't matter, because I think sharing in community like that really gives us great wisdom and opportunity to look at things from a different perspective, learn from Mike and Kim, who have been doing this for quite a while. So we look forward to hearing from you. Please feel free to ask questions along the way. I'll be monitoring the chat box, so just throw them in the chat box, and we can have a conversation together about this. So I'll hand it over, Mike and Kim. Thank you.
Thanks, Hila. One of us is older than the other and has been doing it even longer, and that person is laughing right now. But anyway, welcome everyone. Glad you're here. This is indeed a juicy topic, 360s and contemplating or thinking about perhaps your first time. Last time we spoke about, your first debrief. Well, this is a big step beyond that, going to your first 360. And so Kim and I are going to share a little bit of our experience with it so far, and hopefully there'll be some helpful hints and ideas for you. And we really look forward to hearing from you about any particular questions that you might have to have the conversation go the right way for you and to be most fulfilling for you. So Kim, I don't want to cut you off. Your turn.
Thank you very much, Mike. Well, welcome everybody. So great to have all of you alumni folks tuned in with us today. Really all I wanted to say is that this is our initial foray into the 360. So don't be thinking we're going to be covering everything today. At this point, our thoughts are that we will revisit the 360 over the coming months. So we're just going to do what we can do today. And just to reiterate on Mike's comment about getting your questions into us, during this webinar and or after, any questions, thoughts, queries, by all means, make contact with us. So, the 360. Mike, tell me what some of your thoughts are around what's important about the 360 prior to delivering it. Like, what are some of the upfront points we need to cover?
Yeah, that's a great point, Kim. It's an overwhelming thing to think about. For sure, because it's so rich. There's so much information there. And, the setting of expectations ahead of time really goes a long way in helping it be a good experience for everybody. That's for sure. And by the way, our preferred method of delivering a 360 is to have a first conversation before the 360 even gets on the table, where we might debrief a workplace report or a leadership report, so that we can establish with the participant their foundation of about the model, about the competencies, and about their assessment of themselves, so that when we next introduce the 360, which essentially is feedback from others, that there's the context in place. Having to do that all in one fell swoop is possible, but challenging. So I just share that with you, that if it's ever a choice to be able to do a debrief on one of the reports individually to begin with, that would certainly be, we would say yes to that if that becomes possible. So there's that. And I guess, another thought that comes to mind quickly is, when you're sitting down to do a 360 debrief, what's the ideal? Is this better done in person? And I think we would all concur that there's so much information here. An ideal way to deliver a 360 would be in person somehow. And if that's not possible, then somehow setting the stage in terms of expectations and talking about feedback and what that means, those things are all really important to put some context on it. So I could go on forever, Kim, but if something's occurring to you, please jump in.
Well, the one thing that I'm thinking about is, and it's my belief with regard to all the reports that we use on the EQI 2.0 model, is the importance of the upfront conversations with the decision makers, with the people that have chosen to go this route. and really exploring, what are your desired outcomes here? What do you hope to achieve with this? And getting really clear about that. This is not a process to fix problems. What it is indeed is a great opportunity for personal and professional development. So I think that sometimes people feel if I can just put somebody through a 360, it's going to fix everything. And that's not always the case. So again, it's about clarity about what the desired outcomes are, and how doing a 360 or doing a leadership report can meet those desired outcomes. And I think too, the presentation to the people that are going through the 360. What's the purpose of this? I think in order to remove any suspicion that this is something that's being done to me rather than for me. So it's about getting that message across clearly, that this is for you. It's not something that's being done to you. And definitely talking about the confidentiality aspect, that the person that's going through this process is going to own the report. So that's important dialogue with the decision makers, and it's important dialogue with the people that are going through the process.
And I think, Kim, following on that idea, I think there is such a thing these days as 360 fatigue. There's a lot of 360ing going on out there. This report is particularly comprehensive. It follows the model, the EQI 2.0 model, which is great. But what happens in an office or with a team who's all going to undertake the 360 at the same time, there is the chance for fatigue. People are responding for each other. They become raters for one another. The leader might be having to do it for everybody on his team as a supervisor. And so these are context setting things from an expectation perspective that are also really important to relay to an organization who's considering this. I kind of chuckle about the idea of people coming for remedial purposes, but more often than not, unfortunately, people think, well, okay, this guy, he either has got to do this because we can't, basically they don't want to talk to him. So right. I think the reason is people don't want to give the hard feedback, so they put it onto the 360 process and think that's how this person is finally going to get the feedback that they need. And so that's a challenging situation, which, again, clarifying expectations, talking up front about why this is happening and what their expectations are is really important. In very simple terms, the other quick thought is that the EQI 2.0 is really a self-report. So no matter how honest a person is, we all have our blind spots. We all have things, we all have our version of reality about how we think things are. And the beautiful thing about the 360, of course, is that now we have a chance to round that picture out a bit more and bring in some feedback from others around us. So at its basic level, it's a great thing when from that perspective.
And Mike, I've heard you say too, and I really like this perspective of this is a gift. This information from colleagues, from direct reports, from supervisors is a gift. It's a new source of information, and it's a clear source of information. And to be able to look at it as a gift rather than a threat, I really like that viewpoint that you've expressed before.
Yeah, that's a great reminder. I really do have that conversation with the participant prior to seeing the report. I say, just envision these people. You know how busy all these other folks are that you've asked to be a rater for you. And they have taken the time out of their busy lives because they care about you. They want the best for you. And they've been doing nothing but thinking of you for the 45 minutes or so that, and trying their best to give you something really honest and truthful. And from that perspective, it absolutely is a gift. So, rather than trying to decide who said that and who, where did this come from, just think about it as these people are wanting the best for you and are really working for you, and try to use it from that perspective.
Now, one thing that leaps to my mind at this point is it is a very dense report. There is a lot of information in this report. And I think from the perspective of debriefing it, one thing that always enters into my mind is I need to be really prepared to go where the person wants to go. As much as I want to be able to talk about their personal report that's contained within the 360, more often than not, people are going to want to go to the information from others. So I think it's valuable to think about, I'm just going to be prepared to go where they want to go. Because what I'm trying to do is engage them in the process. Not say, yes, that's an interesting thought, but I'd like you to start here first. So I think it's really important to think about dancing in the moment with this report, and not setting this list of ways you're going to approach it. Just be prepared to be open about that and go where the person wants to go, and make the most of that dialogue. So speaking of that, I'm also thinking it's really valuable to not just schedule one debrief for this report. What I have found is far more beneficial to say, we're going to have a couple of calls to go through this information because there is so much information in it. So let's not feel that we need to cover everything in this session today. We're going to go as far as we can go, and then we'll continue at some point. So I think for me, that's been very valuable in delivering this report, is not expecting that I'm going to be able to do a debrief in one session.
Can we go back for just a minute to kind of prior to initiating the 360 and talk about those open-ended questions and how to determine which questions, what makes the most sense, if there's other questions that we should be adding?
Well, I think, yeah, that's a great idea, Ela. I think for me, my question to the decision maker is, what would success look like to you in delivering this with your people?
And that being said, Kim, there is a drop-down list of potential questions that often, at the very least, you can pick and choose from and say, yeah, that one resonates. But if it's resonating in terms of what we want here or what we're going for, of course, that's absolutely the best. Sometimes some of those questions can be put into one. Two of them can be joined together. You can change the order of them. So, but the good news is that there are some there for you to start with and to consider and to share with both the participant or the supervisor or whoever it is at the organization that is involved in this. Because otherwise, sometimes it's a bit overwhelming. What questions might we ask? And although ideally you're asking something that's very relevant for the circumstance and the situation and the company, if it's a business related one, there are some helpful questions there to begin with.
Does that answer part of your question, Neil?
Yeah, and my brain, and again, maybe it's just because I'm going through this right now, is from the time that you've identified that you're going to do a 360 with the leader, can you do like a high level kind of, this is what I do first, and then this is what I do next, and then this is what I do next, and maybe even include how you're describing that overall process to the leader about, so we're going to initiate a 360 and here's how that's going to unfold. Not just from the report debrief side, but what are the things that you set up and prepare for in advance?
Right. Well, as you ask that question, one of the things that I think about that we've done a number of times is when approached by a leader to do a 360, either for themselves or for their people, is let's go, a suggestion of let's go with a leadership report right now, to just for you to go through the process to get more familiar with the model, to get a greater understanding of what kind of potential impacts this approach can have. I think that in some ways is the most effective way to respond to some of their questions about what it's like, to actually go through the process themselves. because we've run into situations where people say, well, I want my people to go through this, but no indication that they want to go through it themselves. So I think, you know, it's about having that kind of dialogue up front too.
Mm-hmm. But I guess, you know, that it's a good question, Ela, like you know, having the organization come to understand the breadth and scope of what this experience really means. You know, from the beginning, what's the time frame, for example? Is there something in mind that they want to have this to occur by? Well, we know in our experience that you need a minimum of 3 weeks from the time when we actually know who all the raters are going to be, and send them out the links and have them complete assessments and remind those who aren't on it that you need at least 3 weeks right there. So there's a bit of a time factor that probably needs some explaining at the beginning. You know, and speaking of raters, I'm going off the top of my head, but there's a choice here to have, if it's a choice for you as the administrator of the 360 to take control of the raters, do it. You know, when if it's in someone else's hands, it's one more step removed. And we know from experience that raters, they probably all have the best of intentions, but they require some chasing and some reminding. Mm-hmm. And when that's in your control, I think that's a better way to have it. You know, you need to get their information, and there's even a comma-separated Excel spreadsheet that you can send to the person to have them enter all the names and email addresses, so it's easy to upload it into the MHS system. But there's a time frame. I guess that was my big point about this, that it's at least 3 weeks, I think, to get through that. And that's if everything goes well, reasonably efficiently.
That just prompted another question for me. So with a leader that I'm working with currently, I actually had him send an email to his raters to let them know the link was coming.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And then I took over control as the administrator, so sent reminders and reminders. At what point do you stop sending reminders? And so this particular leader had, I think, 24 different raters, and I'd say that I got maybe half of them with a weekly reminder over a 3-week process. Is that typical? Is there something I could have done differently? Like what?
Yeah, that sounds a little low to me. I don't know about you, Kim. Like, there will be some who don't. And if the hard and fast rule for me about how hard I chase and how often is to try to make sure we get at least the minimum number in each category. Because then, you know, if you get less than 3 in the category of peers or, you know, whatever, then it's not going to appear as a category, and it gets lumped into the more generic other category. And not knowing where the feedback is coming from is less helpful when we're doing the debrief in terms of understanding it. So I would continue to push hard always to try and at least get to the minimum of 3. I mean, we all want everybody to do it, but the reality is they don't all do it.
It's important to have that conversation with the person about submitting a number of potential ratees, knowing that some are not going to complete it. So more than 3 per category. And if you get that number, then great. The other part being that I have frequent contact with the person going through the process.
Mike, did you want to bring up that sample report and show anything in particular?
Okay, I will. You know, when it comes to the report, there's again really rich with information, but there's a page. It's page 10, as we often say. If there was one page to pay some attention to, or where, you know, the heart of the matter is all here on this particular page. You know, you've got the visual representation by competency of where all of the categories scored. The numbers would appear. Can you see my arrow moving?
Yes.
Okay, so there would actually be numbers here in another report that you know, you can actually see what the number was. And I'm sorry, it's not on this report, but there's an asterisk whenever a number is more than 10 points apart. So again, as we remember from the EQI, gaps of at least statistical significance are 10 points or more. the same principle applies here. If your manager is consistently the one with the biggest gap with you, that's an interesting piece of information. And you can actually look on the right-hand column and go all the way down and see how many times the manager had a gap of 10 or more points from you. Or you can do that for every category. How about the, the peers? How closely aligned were you with there, or with direct reports? So you can, or you can look to the right and see, hey, this is one where everybody was apart from me. Wow, that my perception is obviously very different than all of the other people I've asked to rate here. So there's some summary ways to prepare yourself going in. For me, a thing I like to do is go to this page and say, what do you notice about this page? What jumps out at you? What did you observe? And, it might be, gosh, I didn't realize I rated myself lower than everybody else all the way through. Okay, there's a really interesting place to begin. It's context setting to a certain extent. It's possible, I suppose, to work through this whole page, just work down it. And where the lines are further apart, there's more disagreement, and those are probably more interesting places to look. Where they're really close together, visually, hey, everybody's pretty much on the same page there. That's a good thing. And, unless it's all together on a low item where you're not feeling very effective. But the good news is, from a 360 and feedback perspective, is everybody's seeing it the same way. So I don't know if there are questions arising particularly, but I thought of all the pages in this thing, this is one that is for sure I use the most, spend the most time here. It allows us to talk about individual competencies. It allows us to talk about trends. It allows us to talk about the categories of raters. That's a really interesting discussion for me at the beginning, is tell me about, your direct reports and what your relationship is like with them. Tell me about your peers. How often do you interact with them? Who's in the other category? Because that's a choice sometimes. Maybe it's external customers are there. Maybe it's board members. Maybe, who knows who's there, but it's interesting to know. It's context setting, I guess, to explore those and find out about it. And who's in family and friends? Is your mother there? Is your spouse there? Or is it people you work with who are also friends? It's helpful to do some exploring there as well.
Mm-hmm. A question that just popped into my mind is, when you've pulled the report and you're sending it to the leader and they're going to read it for the first time, do you give them any things to think about prior to coming to the debrief? And what kind of timing do you give them between sending the report and when the debrief is scheduled?
Well, Ela, with the 360 especially, I do not like to send it really any sooner than 24 hours before I'm going to have that call, which in some ways seems kind of strange because it is such a dense report. There's so much information in it. The reason behind that, my rationale is I don't want them to go off on tangents.
Yeah.
So, it's about actually saying that to people. There's going to be a lot of information here. A lot of it is going to strike you in different ways. Try not to get wrapped up in that and head in your own directions. Try and make notes about what you're curious about, what you might disagree with, what you're wondering about. Make those notes as you go through the report, and that will feed our discussion. So it's the other thing that I include that's important that rarely gets followed is try and focus on your individual report before looking at the 360 aspect. But of course, it's all bundled together, and the likelihood of that happening is reasonably low. So, but that doesn't dissuade me from saying try and focus on your self-assessment first, and see if that's actually a good representation of who you are, what thoughts you might have around how that report has unfolded too. So to try and just be as clear that there's actually two reports here contained within one.
Yeah. And, Kim, just following on that, this is a good reminder that I would, before sending the report, want to have had one last conversation rather than just sending it and trying to write my notes, remember, so whatever, I want to have had a fairly recent conversation with the participant, just to remind them about all the stuff, some of the stuff that Kim's saying, to have that, the feedback is the gift conversation. Another thing that whether we do it at our first thing or not, one of the things we're not looking to do is to have an exercise in rationalization. Well, I know why that they've chosen that, or, that this is not about that really. It's about what's there. This is how people are seeing you. And so, is that okay? And what's there? But rather than trying to tear it apart and rationalize it, we're getting off the course. Even though working on this page, a good question from a debriefing perspective might be, so what do you suppose it is that people see that have caused them to rate? What are they seeing in you that's rating them, having them rate you the way they did? Which is tricky, right? I mean, it's on one hand, you don't want them guessing, but you want them to be you want it to be really reflective about, well, I guess I am pretty quiet, at meetings, or I don't often share my opinion, or, whatever comes up. That's great, rather than trying to dissect and say, well, I know why they said that, or, we had a whatever. So the rationalizing can creep in, and often does, and we really need to try and prevent that. So for me, that's always part of an early discussion. I don't know.
Well, and I think too, as you say that, Mike, I mean, the automatic question is, how are you behaving differently with this group from this group?
Yeah.
So what can you tell me about how you're interacting differently? What is it you're saying differently? How are you presenting yourself differently? What are the benefits of that? What are the downsides of that from your perspective? So it is about swinging it back to their perspective each time too, in conjunction with acknowledging that this gift of other perspectives is going to be very helpful in them sorting out who and how they're being.
And by the way, Ela, I don't know if this is the right time to mention it, but we have, because this is an area of increasing interest and lots of questions, we've actually developed, EITC has developed sort of an administrative guide for administering a 360. And we're just putting the final polishing touches on it. And our intention is to make it available to alumni as another thing that would be helpful to you. So watch for it. We'll get it posted in the alumni section on the website. And if you're in urgent need of it, just send us a note, and we'll, get a copy into your hands right away. But so it's based on our experience, all the various steps and what's the right order of things and what to watch out for. So, basically you could read that instead of listening to Kim and I talk today, but it is available, and we'd be happy to share it with you. And we wrote it for you, the alumni, our alumni. That's
great. Thank you for bringing that up, Mike. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Kim.
Mike, do we have any sense of when that's going to be on the alumni site?
Ela may have a better sense. I would say, though, it's pretty imminent, like maybe, next week, hopefully.
Yes, so I'm happy to respond on that. I think the new alumni site is almost ready for a soft launch. So we'll be sending out communication about that pretty soon. And we intend to have our webinars for alumni, just like this one, recorded and on the site, so you can refer back to them whenever you want to, as well as additional resources, templates, tools, things that are just for our alumni. And I would suggest that, yes, that's coming out probably within the next week or so.
Great, thanks, Ela.
Awesome.
Well, I want to thank both of you so much for your time and your wisdom, and for our attendees for coming in and participating. We hope that this was of value to you. We thought we would go back into doing a debrief and start to look at how some of the different competencies start to play with each other, and looking more particularly at some sample reports and having a dialogue and conversation about what these things might mean, and just going deeper into some of those areas. So we hope you'll join us. Again, thanks to everybody. We appreciate you having you here, and we will see you on the next alumni webinar.
Awesome.
Thanks a lot, folks.
Thanks, everybody. Talk to you next time.